Cockney feet mark the beat of history. Every street pins a memory down. Nothing
I have to tell you now, this country is at war with Germany.
4.5 years of austerity living had a reaction this Easter. The bank holiday spirit returned to Britain. Hampstead Heath has changed very little. The people on it have changed very little. And if we weren't so modest, we'd say they're still the greatest people in the world.
Easter 1944. London is in holiday mood, but there are rumours of an Allied invasion into France. Where and when will it happen? Will Hitler retaliate? Does he have secret weapons? Will London be bombed yet again? The Allied troops billeted in London had no answers, and Londoners could only sit, wait, and speculate.
Don't need to know.
This airfield held one of the biggest secrets of the war, for it was from here that hundreds of agents and supplies by the ton were delivered by air to occupied Europe.
I knew about SOE, and when this little letter came round saying they wanted people to work in occupied Europe, I realized that this really was what I would like to do.
I want you both to go to occupied France. I don't need to say the job is difficult and dangerous. That must be obvious to you both.
At a much later stage, I saw my personal file, and I looked to see how I'd influenced the selection group. And in it said he seems to be well motivated, but was he tough enough? Is he tough enough? Now, you know, for a lad of 23, that's about all you can say.
Do you think we're the right people for the job?
We're sure of it.
All right, I'm on.
Good.
What do we do first, sir?
Get fit.
You were squadded off into groups of about half a dozen and made to do silly tasks, and this went on for about 3 days. And I think the most valuable thing we did for the selectors was that at the end they said, if you were going into occupied territory, put in order of preference the blokes you'd like to go with, and I think that was more valuable than anything else.
The instructors were like smooth young university dons who'd taken a course under Pimpernel Smith or Raffles. They told us in the most gentlemanly manner how to burgle a house, how to get out of handcuffs. They told us almost apologetically about lethal tablets, suicide pills, to be taken only as a last resort.
We all trained together from January till we broke up for the invasion. And after the usual sort of shy, self-conscious start, within a fortnight we were all talking French there. And I hadn't been very interested in French at school, so I wasn't very good at it. But the shutters went up at this place and the French poured in. And I could not speak perfect French, but I could speak fluent French.
Then my mother brought me to London. I was about 8 years old.
Let's say she took you to Quebec. It's a bit further away and would help to explain the accent.
By May 1944, London seemed almost empty. Where were all the troops and trucks going? All eyes turned to the south coast. Some people knew the answer, but they also knew that careless talk costs lives.
As far as D-Day was concerned, as a driver, I actually drove an Admiralty planning team in 1942 to Devonport, and I listened to them talking, and they'd got their maps in the car, and they were saying, right, we will put 6 tank landing craft here and 10 troop transports there. And I thought to myself, well, this is not the Pas de Calais. And in that time, in 1942, I knew that Second Front would be in Normandy.
Lovesick John Jones met indiscreet Mary Brown. He said to her,
"Let's go to Coombewood for a picnic on Saturday, Mary."
She said to him,
"We can't do that, silly. It's closed to the public. There's a dump of our new mine detectors there."
We had to be very careful because the whole concept was that the landings on the continent would go from Dover to Calais. That was the big build-up, you know, and it was an absolute con. I knew that in 1942 that it was a con, you know.
It's more important than ever nowadays
A lot of us had a lot of information that was very secret, and nobody ever snitched. It was quite incredible how you could manage to keep your mouth shut. We had to be very careful because they really didn't know that we were going to Normandy, you know. I remember the transports going overhead. The aircraft, instead of being camouflaged as they'd always had been up to then, they had two big white rings painted round them so that you noticed them. And the roundels were also very prominent too, so it was quite clear that they were British aircraft. So we saw that. That was in the morning when it started, and we saw those very early on, and everybody was saying, "Where are they going to?" And I said, "Well, they're going to Normandy." And they said, "Don't be stupid, of course they're not." That was the first time I spoke.
Back in London, only a few people knew. It was a well-kept secret. Around daybreak, we correspondents were called and told to be at the Ministry of Information at 8. Then they told us.
Well, the family was full of women now, of course, and children. There were very few men about. So you didn't see any of your own men folk unless they were on leave. But I didn't find that strange after a while. It seemed to be quite natural. It was the same with lots of people in our road, mainly women.
I'm Mrs. Payne from Upstairs. I wonder if you'd like to come over and have a cup of tea at my house.
Thank you.
I think neighbours were more neighbourly in those days than they are now. Everybody seemed to know everybody else's business. So there was sort of quite self-contained little communities, really. And there was always someone around to give you a thick ear if you pushed your luck too far, I recall. Yeah, so there was... In lots of ways it was quite pleasant, really, I suppose. And in other ways it was uncertain because you didn't know what was coming next.
London is doomed, said Dr. Goebbels, and Adolf Hitler's intuitive propaganda experts claimed that in its first few days of attack, V1, the flying bomb, the robot bomb, the buzz bomb, had almost entirely removed the city of London from the war-scarred face of the earth.
Barely 10 days after the landings at Normandy, Hitler vented his anger on London and the southeast.
Once again, the great, patient, enduring city of London was suffering. Suffering, but alive.
Yet again, worried mothers had to send their children into the care of strangers.
I remember the trip to Yorkshire was very long. A lot of railway journeys were very long in those days. It was a sort of farming, come mining community. We didn't see any of the war there, not a bit of it. And they weren't sure how long I was going to stay, so I never went to school. All the time I was there, I was out in the open, in the wind and the rain. Lovely. Who wants to be stuck in a classroom, learning tables and things when you can be out in the open? There was no noise of aircraft, no moaning Mini, no going into air raid shelters or down the underground to shelter. None of that. Sheer freedom from all of it. Terrific. Yeah, that's why I didn't miss anybody back home, I forgot completely about them. Till someone mentioned them. Selfish of me, really, I suppose, but there you are. There it is. That's life.
They come droning and sputtering and roaring, and you don't know when they'll suddenly stop and drop on you. Yes, London suffered under V1. 23,000 buildings utterly destroyed. 1 million damaged. Over 5,000 lives lost. Over 16,000 broken.
One of the things which one has to learn, I think, as a doctor, is to be detached but imaginative. We had patients brought to us by ambulances, and there'd be all kinds of injuries, fractures and crushes, and sadly some people dead, and others just frightened out of their wits, poor things, and shocked, terribly shocked. It's amazing what the human frame can put up with, there's no doubt about that. And again, there is an awful lot in the spirit of the person, whether they are determined that they are not going to be defeated. I was very interested in anatomy and in the nervous system, and we were doing research as well as mending the patients, and it sounds terrible, but in many ways, the happiest days of one's life. It was very satisfying, very fulfilling, and we met some superb young men and women, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and civilians. A wonderful person we were very fortunate to work with was Joseph Trueta, who had been a great man in the Spanish Civil War in Barcelona. He was a great help in just telling people how to organize air raid services and blood transfusion. And when the invasion of Normandy occurred, I was seconded to his post as the one to do the nerve injury work for him. Some of the worst injuries that I saw were the nerve injuries after D-Day. The organization of the services was magnificent. We were getting cases within 24 hours of injury. Little brown leaflet of notes. One very horrible case was a poor man whose arm had been the target of a grenade, and when you lifted it up, it just sagged. And the remarkable thing about that was all the little bits of bone were left there with their covering of periosteum, which has got the bone-generating cells under it, were there. And the end of the story was he had a nice solid arm, the nerve had gone beyond repair, and we gave him a tendon transplant and he went back on duty. And we had other cases with dreadful injuries down the side. I mean, there's one man whose whole side had been just flayed. But again, the human body, and don't forget, they were fit young men, well fed, and at that stage, we were beginning to get penicillin.
The drug has had lightning success in some of the most obstinate cases of infected wounds. Men once fated to pass months of agony in bed will now spend there only a few painless days.
We had a little boy who was as near dead, I think, as one might reasonably expect. A child whose lungs looked like a snowstorm because he got abscesses. He got bone abscesses in both lower limbs, both upper limbs. And the ordinary treatment of perhaps treating the bones you couldn't have done. You'd have filleted the child. It was a terrible dilemma. Did we treat the child with penicillin or not? Because we were told you have penicillin and you do nothing. You don't give him a blood transfusion, you can relieve his pain, you feed him, but nothing else. And we decided, well, this is the chance. And it was a near miracle. That child was a marvelous recovery.
Just a minute. Sixpence. Oh, there won't be much good to you in France.
Don't forget to write me when I come back.
Okay. Any bus tickets in your bag?
these teams of 3 that were going to set Europe ablaze, arm the, were always, our aim was not to be a continuation of the resistance. We were intended to manifest the beginning of the liberation, to wear uniform when we could, and we were always an officer of the country, and then a British or an American officer to show that truly this was an allied thing under a radio operator who'd be one of the other nationalities. It was very difficult coming out of occupied France, and within 24 hours being in a family home. That I found quite difficult. The gentleness of the family home, as opposed to the tensions and the potential violence that could erupt at any time in the field, that was difficult. Took a day or two to readjust. I used to have fighting dreams, and you better ask Gay about these. But I never did her any damage, but I nearly did her damage once. I don't think I was seriously disturbed. I just think that it was a more or less natural reaction to rather a sudden change of environment. The time I came back from Brittany, which was the first job, about late August or third week in August, and I went into the Arnhem one the first week of September. So I was told that I could be free so long as I rang them up every day, and they'd tell me if they wanted me back. So we took a rowing boat on the Thames, and we had 5 lovely days together, and then they rang out, on one of the days they said, come back. So we came back. But we enjoyed that time.
Coming back was just as difficult as going, actually. It was same sort of emotional thing, you know, because you were leaving something you were now getting used to, going back to something you'd left behind and didn't really know about anymore, because I was still quite young in many ways. So it was just as much a wrench going back as it was leaving. I don't remember my mother mentioning any news from my father at all. I remember we went to see him once when he was at Caterham before he went overseas. We went down there to see him, but he was moving pretty rapidly at the time, so it was only a hello, goodbye sort of meeting, having taken hours to get there. You know, just sort of wave and that was it. He was off with everybody else. Even though I was quite young, I used to like to roam, and of course you could travel quite a distance in those days with threepence. You know, world was your oyster. And I used to go down to the Pool of London and just stand there along the embankment and watch all the ships. It was all hustle and bustle, you know, the lighters and things going from boat to boat, and the police launches riding up and down, and the fire service going in and out. So much going on, and different shouts from one ship to another. Yeah, quite exciting. What I did think of at the time when I was watching the boats, I'd like to be on that boat going out there now, you know, because I knew about submarines and things, because everybody mentioned those, and I'd seen 1 or 2 films with submarines, and I thought I'd like to go out there and sort of sail the sea and outwit a submarine or something, you know. Crazy things like that.
Driving in the blackout was very difficult because you did have a very, very small amount of light, but it only went down immediately in front of you. And this night, this officer had had a pretty nasty time. And he got into the lorry. I had a steel helmet on and my respirator across my breast. So he couldn't see. He hadn't seen me get out. He hadn't heard me speak. And he let out a stream of filth. Most of words I had never heard before, and none of them that I really understood. I'd been brought up as a strict Baptist, you know. And the war rather got paid to that. But anyway, I let him go on until he was finished. And then I said very politely, did he want me to take him to the officers' mess first and then drop the ratings in the barracks, or would I do the journey the other way round? Which was when I heard a sentence which all service women absolutely treasured. It was something that, we didn't hear very often, and that's the only time I heard it. Oh, my God, a woman. That meant that he thought I ought to have been a man in that particular situation. And the fact that I wasn't a man, I was doing the job that I'd volunteered to do. So that was that story. He never said another word.
A new nightmare weapon terrified even the most hardened Londoners. Concerned about morale, the government waited several weeks before admitting that the gas main explosions were in fact V2 rockets.
Towards the end of the war, I felt that all the people in London were getting tired, because I was a Londoner myself and I was in London. But I think that what was different as far as London was concerned was the fact that the bombardment was sustained. You had the Blitz, and then you'd have, say, a few months quiet, and then the next round would come. Whereas in the other cities, it was one big thing, and then they didn't have an awful lot more. Most of them didn't have an awful lot more. We had to sustain continued things, which finished up with the awful doodlebugs, which were very frightening, and then the really frightening thing, which were the rockets. So that London was sustained for 5 years. They were forever. They were never able to really settle down and think, well, that was it. We've had it now, and we can start rebuilding our lives, because they couldn't rebuild their lives. And if the women and people who lived in London had not stood fast, there would have been no second front. It was the fact that they were able, even under great duress, to hold fast in difficult circumstances, that enabled us to use our coastline to launch our liberation of the continent. And I think people should remember that.
The winter of 1944 was particularly harsh, and for those on the front line, it almost seemed too cold to fight. The V2s were still dropping on London. Would this war never end? Not knowing it was to be the last Christmas spent in the shadow of war, weary Londoners made the best of it and remembered loved ones.
Here's a toast. Absent friends.
Absent friends.